I believe I can see the PowerPoint.
Okay.
If,
All right.
so everyone should be able to see it. Hold on.
Okay.
Yep, our participants can see it. They're good.
Good. Okay. All right. So we're happy to have Steve Barkley with us. He is a consultant with PLS Third Learning, which is an education company here in the Buffalo, New York area. And Steve is an international consultant and speaker. And we're very fortunate to have him with us today to talk about instructional coaching. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be with you. My comments are designed to look at applying the whole backwards planning process to instructional coaching, but also to a whole lot of the other work that I'm making the assumption that the people on the webinar take part in. So if they would feel free to shoot their questions when I'm off the mark, I'd be happy to line that up for them. Just real quick, a little bit about my background. I spent 10 years as a elementary classroom teacher in the 5th and 6th grade, and spent 5 years as a first grade teacher. And then began to work as a teacher trainer in professional development. And it's at that point that I began working and moving around to lots of different schools that I made the discovery of how different my background in education had been from most of the other teachers I was meeting. I'm a graduate of East Stroudsburg in Pennsylvania. And I ended up there in an experimental program where I got to spend a whole year in student teaching in a laboratory school setting. So all my teaching decisions were made in contact with other people. My instruction was always observed by other people and talked about. And after that year, I took my first job teaching in New Jersey in an open concept school. So now I was on a 5th and 6th grade team that had 100 kids in one large room with 4 teachers, with paraprofessionals, and with student teachers. I was so excited about my undergraduate program that when my district hired me, I convinced them to become a professional development center for East Stroudsburg. And so I had student teachers now in my school where I was a first-year teacher. After 5 years of teaching 5th and 6th, I call it on a dare, I transferred to teach first grade. And I only survived because I team taught with an experienced teacher. We had a double classroom, anywhere from 35 to 50 kids, depending on the year. And it was the 2 of us and a paraprofessional and usually a student teacher from the same program. And as a first grade team, we were on a kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade team. And so that was my whole background in teaching. Now I began working as a teacher trainer, PD, traveling around to schools, and I began to meet teachers to whom all of those experiences were foreign. I met teachers that hadn't been in another teacher's classroom in 5 years. I met teachers who were making all of their instructional decisions isolated. So that's really what drove my work into the area of coaching. I started first with a focus on peer coaching. The first book I wrote, Quality Teaching and a Culture of Coaching, was focused on peer coaching. I later went on then to focus on instructional coaching as those positions began to be created. Did a lot of work with the training of mentors and also looking at school administrators in their role as coaches. Also do a lot of work with professional learning communities and teachers working and learning in that collaborative setting. Danielle, if you'll click it ahead to the 3rd slide there, it's the one that says continuous improvement across the top. This is the backward model.
Which one is it? That went so fast.
A little bit further.
Sorry.
It really jumped on you. No, keep going. Keep going back. Yeah, there you go. The continuous improvement one. This is the backward model that I use in all of my work, whether I'm working with a single teacher in a coaching relationship, or whether I'm working with a professional learning community. I could be working with a leadership team of a school or some program that is district-wide. Whatever that setting is, I approach it with this same backwards planning process. And that means we start by identifying the student achievement, the student outcome that we want to gain. And with a clear picture of what we're looking for as that outcome, we then work backwards. And the next step backwards then is identifying what I've began calling student learning production behaviors, meaning what is it that the student does that produces the learning outcome. So I started probably about 15 years ago now with the message that teachers don't cause student achievement, students cause student achievement. And that if the teachers are causing student achievement, they're cheating. And I don't mean that necessarily literally, but if teachers are taking a shortcut, if kids are learning the material without the students doing the work, it's not going to stick. And when people get too test focused, that's often the outcome. They look for shortcuts to get kids to pass a test.
Did it freeze? Mm-hmm. Hopefully he comes back and unfreezes. Angela, it looks like Steve is frozen. Oh, and now he just dropped off.
I bet you he'll probably come right back.
Okay. Thank you.
I will watch for him. Sometimes if he doesn't use the same link, then he might come in as a panelist instead.
Okay.
Give me one sec.
It's his. I've seen pieces of them before though. When we were developing them. When we first saw this.
Come on, Steve.
Right. Do you know what that means? No. Is that how many people are watching?
Danielle, do you have the ability to call him?
I don't. Generally, he's in Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
Oh, all right. First, we can see you on the bottom of your screen. There's a here.
I just emailed him.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna do the same thing.
Okay.
Today. I hope we'll be able to get the connection back.
Oh, no.
Nope.
Oh, here we go. Hold on. Come on, computer.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
Okay, Steve, you're back.
Yep, I got you back up off of my phone. See if I can pick this back up. Then, so in that backwards process, you're going from the.
Hold on one second, Steve. Danielle, can you put the slides back up?
Yeah, I just, there they are. Okay.
I'm so sorry, folks. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
New share. Not really a new share.
No, just
What do I?
you can unshare and then reshare.
All right, so if I go to participants, what do you want me to go to?
You are a participant. If you just go down to the bottom where it says share,
Yeah,
and then you should be able to choose the window you want to share.
this, right? I want to record iPhone, no. My screen, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I'm seeing right now. I see the.
NAMTC, right? I lost
Yeah.
the slides here somewhere.
All right, so go back to
Oh,
your.
here we go.
There
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's okay. Steve, we're on the
Yep.
continuous
Right.
improvement slide.
I see it. I see it. So where I had left off when it broke on me. So you start with the student achievement. You identify the student behaviors to make that happen, then the teacher behaviors that are going to cause those student behaviors. And then the next step is to look at what are the teacher relationships that are necessary in order for this to happen. How do the people in a school need to work together to support that whole process? And then lastly, you get to the school leadership behaviors. So the way that I describe this is when you plan backwards, you get to the leadership behaviors last. Now when you're ready to implement, the leadership behaviors go first. So now, what is it that the leadership in the school needs to do that's going to drive the rest of this process into the teacher behaviors, into the student behaviors? So, for example, it's not uncommon for me to work with building administrators, and I'm sharing this model, and they'll say, well, teachers need to collaborate, but there's no time for them to collaborate. And I love to look out and say, man, we need to talk to the people who are doing the scheduling. And those are the people that are seated there in the room. So if you decide that something is critical to happen in this behavior, that's then what's going to kick off the school leadership behaviors. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through this piece by piece with you next then. So Danielle, if you'll move us ahead to the next slide that says student achievement. Oh, you're too far ahead.
Too far
Back
ahead.
up
Okay.
Yep. You'll find a slide that says student achievement. Back further.
Okay.
A little bit further. You get it. It'll say student achievement. One more. Keep going. Yeah. Keep going. There's another. There's a couple
more?
of slides that say student achievement.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Now it went the other way. Okay. Student achievement. All right.
One more.
Oh,
I think one
come
more.
on.
Oh,
I said it's.
we're close.
Right. It's not wanting to. Why is it? It goes the other way for some reason. Okay.
There you go. One more. You got it.
Okay.
The key with student achievement is to get a clear picture. There you go. Student achievement goals.
Okay.
The key is to get a clear picture of what it is we're looking for in the student outcome. So I found this slide on a district website that identified that their areas of student achievement, the goals that they were working on, they identified as high academics. So those things that students were going to be tested on. They identified life skills, the attributes and attitudes that were going to cause students to be successful. That's it. That's on that slide right there with the blue circles. You did it. And then lastly, for their particular district, it was responsibility to the community was one of the outcomes that they sought. Now, what made this jump out at me when I first found it, it was the first district that I found that put these terms under student achievement. Now, I've worked in all 50 states. I've probably worked in 12 different international settings now. And almost all the schools I work with have things under life skills, like collaborative abilities with the group, a growth mindset might be something they're looking at, or students being global learners. But I always found that those words tended to be in their mission or vision statement. And if they're in the mission and vision statement, the problem is nobody's measuring them. Once you take those words and you begin to put them into your definition of student achievement, then you really have to identify how you're going to measure that those changes are occurring. So frequently, one of the questions I'll ask a group when I'm working with them at this point is, what attitude they want students to develop about reading. And I'll let people chat on that for a minute or two. And then I'll come back to identify. They're all pretty clear as to an attitude and a belief they want kids to have about reading. And then I'll ask them, are they measuring it? And they aren't. Schools will say students working collaboratively is critical, but they don't document that their 8th grade students leave middle school with a stronger set of collaborative skills than the 6th graders came in. I'm working with one school in North Dakota now. They looked at the 4 C's of creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, and they're looking at this year's freshman students needing a 4 C's graduation portfolio. So they're saying at the time of graduation, those students need to go in front of a committee and identify the growth that they've made in each of those 4 areas. Now, once you begin to document that growth, then that will take you back to saying, okay, what do students have to engage in? I mean, everybody had the 4 C's embedded in their school's mission and vision statements. But if you ask a teacher, where were those things built into lesson plans, they kind of happened or they didn't happen. So a lot of my work, again, whether it's with an individual teacher or teams of teachers or schools, gets driven back to getting people to define what those student learning outcomes are that they want to have happen. I just want to take a quick moment on those blue overlapping circles that are there. I've written quite a bit about respecting teachers' individual autonomy and individual agendas. So while teachers are part of a team which has identified some common outcomes that they want to reach, I believe that teachers also have to be respected to have additional outcomes that they want students they're working with to reach beyond the ones that are designed and subscribed by the school. So in that diagram, I'm trying to show that I could have 3 teachers and they may all be teaching the same freshman English course. So there is a set of standards that all the kids should leave that English course with, regardless of which of the 3 teachers they've taken. But if we turn around and say to the public that it doesn't matter which of the 3 teachers your kids get because they're going to get the same thing, that's really disrespectful to teachers. My finding is most teachers aren't motivated to be teachers based on the standards that they have to teach. So I like to describe it that the standards are the cost of being a teacher. If you'll make sure that your kids will meet the standards, then we'll give you time with kids to do the other things that you believe and think are important. Let me just give another example or 2 here, and then I'd like to see if there's any questions or comments from the group. If you go ahead a slide, Danielle.
Yeah. Okay. Carefully. Right. Here we go again. Right. It's definitely likes this spot.
Yeah, I don't know why it jumps like that. On you. I was going to say, there you go. This slide here. So I'm working with a school, with a district that has identified that their district goal is for their students to be innovators, reflective learners, collaborators, and critical thinkers and responsible citizens. So as I was working with them, the first thing we had to do is stop and identify what does that look like. So I had them approach it at 3rd grade, 6th grade, 9th grade, and seniors. What would be student outcome behaviors that would tell you those things were happening? So then if you go ahead one more slide, I then look next at just pulling one of the items out of that list, which in this case, when I was working with the district, it was the reflective learner. So then under reflective learner, they now listed another 4 specific things that those students would illustrate that would show that was the outcome. So I'm wondering if there's any comments or questions that people would make about this issue of getting people to be clear on what the student achievement outcome is that they're working to get in order for you to be coaching a teacher or for you to be working with a team or a school. Anybody want to stick something in the chat box there for us?
So from my point, this is Danielle talking, Steve. So from my point of view, we hear about standards, we hear about the knowledge and skills that students need, and yet we don't often have conversations about what we want the students to look like or what behaviors. And so this is really, even though we've talked about reflection and student ownership, I don't know that we have clearly defined what that looks like from the student point of view. When we walk around classrooms and look at the things that we see on the wall, you know, we'll see where students are identifying where they are, how well they know something. But I don't think that we have clearly defined it for them or for ourselves. And so this makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and it takes it takes a lot of work and a lot of communication. So, for example, in the district that I'm illustrating here, they've chosen reflective learner as their year-long focus. So the PD is around reflective learners. Each of the teachers wrote a growth plan, a personal growth plan around reflective learners. And so just the amount of conversation that we need to get people engaged in to make this happen becomes critical.
Absolutely.
Want to take us ahead another slide then, and let's take a look then at this concept of student production behaviors. So I kind of am almost embarrassed at how long I felt it took me to identify in my work that we were frequently looking at a standard that we were supposed to address, and the question the teachers were asking is, what's the teacher behavior? So if this is what the kids need to learn, what is it that I need to do as a teacher to cause that learning to happen? And we were skipping the question of what it is the students needed to do to cause that learning to happen. And so when I first started going forward with this, I was just calling it student behaviors. And so I would meet with teachers and say, okay, what are the student behaviors you need in order for this learning to happen? And the problem with the term student behaviors, it took everybody to classroom management behaviors. And while those things are critical and important, they were a much smaller subset of the total student learning behaviors that I wanted to consider. So after a lot of struggle, I finally came across the term student production behaviors. So on this slide, I'm separating for you what I call student outcome behaviors and student production behaviors. The student outcome behaviors are what you observe the student doing that tells you the learning has occurred. So a student can write at this level on a rubric, or a student can read with this comprehension, or a student can collaborate on a project with this skill set of collaboration. The production behaviors are the things that students are engaged in when the learning hasn't happened that cause the learning to be produced. So when I began to look around, I found a couple people who were really good at this. The first one that I established was the elementary music teachers who teach kids their first musical instrument. And they're among the few people who understand that squeaky noises is student production behavior. There's no parent at home listening to that noise going, oh my God, I have a musician in the family. My granddaughter came home. I happened to be visiting with her flute the day that she got it. And she opened up the case and she didn't even put the instrument together. She just took out the one piece. And she said, Pop, can you help me? I need to make this noise for 10 seconds, you know? And so this eek, and we got to 8.5, and I told her I thought we could round it up to 10 and let's move on. And, I've met with elementary music teachers and I've asked them, how do you give kids positive feedback? And I loved it because they told me, well, we tell them all the time, we enjoy watching you play. And they mean that. They really do enjoy watching. You couldn't say you enjoy listening to that. But the more the kids' cheeks are puffing up or their eyes are about ready to pop, the teacher's got a big smile on her face because she knows the students are engaged in the student production behavior. So if I can keep that behavior going long enough, it's going to lead to my outcome. The other group that I found really bought into this and makes a ton of sense to them are all your athletic coaches. Their whole practice is about identifying what the production behaviors are. So what is it that a student is doing at practice that leads a student to the development of an outcome? And to me, one of the hardest parts of teaching, and to me it's what needs to be happening in a PLC, is the ability to look at a standard and figure out what the student learning production behaviors are. And once I know what it is that kids need to spend their time doing, now I can back up and begin to look at the teacher behaviors that would cause those student behaviors. So Danielle, if you can take us ahead a slide, I've got an example here.
And that probably went too many, right? It's still jumping fast. So which one is it?
That one there with the pyramid on it. Yeah. So in this slide here, the outcome behavior is that I'm looking for students to have increased vocabulary. And so that would show up in students' writing and students' reading comprehension. On the right-hand side are the student production behaviors. So as students were engaged in spending time listening to other people use that vocabulary, if students were given the opportunity to talk using the new vocabulary in conversations, if they were reading material that had that vocabulary in it, and ultimately if they were writing for a purpose using that vocabulary, those are the behaviors that will cause the vocabulary to develop. So if I'm observing in a classroom and I see kids engaged in those behaviors on the right-hand side, I'm going to make my assumption that the vocabulary is going to go up. This was an example close to me because in that chance to practice with my granddaughter, she frequently came home on a Friday with the same homework assignments, which was a vocabulary test that's going to occur on Monday. And so 4 pages in a workbook, and she figured out she could memorize one word from a definition to match one of the vocabulary words. And so she goes in every Monday and scores a 90% or better on a vocabulary test. But those words were never part of her written or spoken vocabulary. I don't think she'd recognize them 6 weeks later if they came up in material that she was reading. It wasn't the right production behaviors to get the long-term outcome that you're seeking. And that's why I made that statement earlier that when teachers get test focused, they look for what I call steroids or shortcuts. If the athletic coaches hand out steroids, short-term kids will get muscles, but long-term the whole thing crashes. Kids need to do the work to get the muscles. And the same is true in learning, that we need to get students engaged in the work. And the big job of the teachers to figure out what that work is. So if you look at the next 2 slides there, it's back to the example of that school that I was working with that was focused on just lost the term, on students being reflective learners. So the outcome, one of the outcomes that they were looking for was for students to have an understanding of growth mindset. So on this slide, you're looking at that as the outcome, but over on the right-hand side now, begin to list the things that students would engage in that would lead students to the discovery of growth mindset. Mm-hmm. So I think this is another time here, if we just take a quick pause. I'm wondering if there's some connections people are making to this concept of student learning production behaviors. I did work with a district in Texas that worked this into their professional development, so that when they ran professional development workshops, the workshop would actually list in the description of the workshop the student production behaviors that would be the outcome. So if you went to the workshop to learn how to use this app, these are the behaviors you would be looking to have students come out with in your classroom. If you were going to this Socratic seminar workshop, here's the behaviors, and getting teachers to make that connection that it was the student behavior that was going to produce the student achievement learning, and that the purpose of the professional development was for the teacher to learn how to get the student behavior. Any questions, comments there? If not, let's go ahead then to the teacher behaviors now. And the two most critical teacher behaviors that I get folks to zero in on once they've done the student learning production behaviors are that the teacher has to be in a position to teach the behavior and to model the behavior. Danielle, you should find that ahead 2 slides there, I think.
Here?
Yep. So, well, yeah, look at the next slide. So what are the changes that need to occur in teacher behavior in order to get the student behaviors that you want? So if you consider when I'm working with a school leadership team, so the school leadership team sets goals that they're looking to achieve in student learning outcomes. So then I take them backwards and say, okay, if you were looking for student math results to increase, when you went into math classrooms, what do you think it is you would have to see as student behaviors in math classrooms that would be producing that learning? Then take the next step back and identify what is it that teachers now would do in order to get those student behaviors. And very often, those two critical behaviors are that the teacher actually has to stop and teach the students the learning production behavior, and to then be a model of that learning production behavior. And if I was going to add one to that list yet, it would be coaching that student learning production behavior.
Steve, we do have a question.
Yep.
It asks, it sounds like you work with teachers to collaboratively identify both the learning outcome and the student production behaviors. Is that correct? That
is correct. So if I can give you an example right now, I was just on a call today. I live in Switzerland right now, and I'm working with a French international school here, and their focus in the elementary school is on student writing. So I'm working with the teachers in PLCs first to identify goals. So who are their top 3rd grade writers now, and what would they expect those students to be doing at the end of the year? And who are students that are on level now, and what would they be expected to be doing the end of the year? And then who are students that are below the grade level standard? What's your goal for them to be doing at the end of the year? Now that we've got that goal, and in this case, I actually had them identify writing samples that they could use as those goals. Now back up from that and say, okay, what do each of those groups of students need to be engaged in? That would, meaning the student learning production behaviors that would get them to those goals. And then the next step back now is to identify what their options are in teacher behaviors. And that whole process is what they are working on collaboratively.
Thank you, Steve.
So I think I'll if there aren't other questions or comments there, I'll jump ahead then to the piece on collaborative. And if you go ahead one more slide, there you go, right there, teacher relationships. Okay, so I like to zero folks in on this a piece from Roland Barth, and he described that when you looked at school relationships, he spotted these 4 different settings. So one he called parallel play, similar to early childhood, where kids play near each other rather than with each other. I describe that as I go to the middle school and I talk to kids and find out they have 4 major projects due the same week. And then when I talk to the teachers, they say, don't talk to me, I only assigned 1. So that's a pretty good picture of parallel play. Adversarial, Barth described teachers tending not to be openly confrontational, but he identified teachers as being adversarial through the withholding of information. So I've got a teacher who struggled with a student, invested a lot of time, maybe met with the parents, made a breakthrough with the student, but they never went to check with the guidance to find out who the other teachers are that student has this semester, and look at passing that information on and working with the teacher. To me, the worst scenario of adversarial is when it happens to beginning teachers. And I call it hazing. So I'm in a school where I'm watching a beginning teacher struggle, and colleagues aren't stepping in. And when I ask them why, they tell me it's that they don't want to interfere. And I see it more as hazing. Nobody was here to help me, and so I'm going to let this next person struggle the same way. The next one he described as congenial. And described as kind of good news that teachers tend to be friendly people and most schools tend to be friendly places to work. I describe congenial as if you're pregnant, you want to be teaching in an elementary school because you'll get the best baby shower ever. If you're a man and you've had a baby shower, I can almost guarantee you we're working in an elementary school. As a man going down to the gym and say to the other men, tell them about your baby shower, you're going to get strange looks. But if you were teaching in an elementary school, you got one. At the secondary level, I call congenial is we go out for happy hour every Friday. But we have a rule: if you talk about kids, you have to buy the next drink. When teachers are congenial, they're friendly, but they don't mix work with their friendship. So I've taught next to a person for 5 years that I know things about their spouse and kids that nobody else knows, but I don't remember them ever bringing a lesson plan over and asking me to take a look at it before they taught it and give some input or insight on it. When that's happening, you've gone to the last one there, which is collegial. And when teachers are collegial, their work is highly influenced by the input of colleagues. So in a collegial school, teachers are constantly taking their student work to other teachers. They may be taking it to the next grade level teacher and asking for input. Or the science teacher is taking a piece of student writing to an English teacher and getting input. At that point, I've done a lot of writing about schools calling things teams that aren't teams. And the word that I've found that I've been using in my work is franchises. So when I go to a second grade team meeting, I find out it's really not a team meeting, it's a second grade franchise meeting. There's 5 second grade teachers there. They each own a second grade. Yep. Once a week, they exchange tips and strategies, and then they go back and run their own business. So it really is it's a franchise. I've recently just did a blog on the difference between cooperating and collaborating. That in those franchises, teachers cooperate. They may exchange some materials, they may exchange some ideas, but they aren't collaborating to learn something new. They aren't together solving problems. Very interesting. I just with this French school that I was telling you about, I had a conversation with the principal today, planning for a Skype session I'm going to be doing with their staff in 2 weeks, and some of the teachers are finding that in the PLCs there's some conflict, and I'm working hard to get them to understand that's a good sign. That if you move from cooperation to collaboration, you're going to get conflict. When you're cooperating, you're doing everything you can to avoid the conflict, to effectively, quickly get things done. When you start collaborating, you want to be getting different ideas out on the table, tugging and pulling on them, because that's what's going to produce the new learning. So when I lay my backwards plan out with a school, my belief on this one here is that until a school becomes collegial, it won't reach maximum student achievement. And so I offer for folks a starting point for administrators is to focus on getting teachers to make a 3-year commitment to kids. And so by a 3-year commitment, I'm saying as a 3rd grade teacher, I'm going to spend time in the classrooms and in conference with 2nd grade teachers. And I'm going to spend time in classrooms and interacting with the other 3rd grade teachers. And I'm going to spend time in classrooms and interacting with 4th grade teachers. So I have a responsibility to help teachers who are working with students before they come to me understand my program and how their work fits into my program. It's my opportunity to know what kids are doing and experiencing in order to get them ready for mine. And then I do the same thing at the next grade level. And then I do it across the school so that art, music, PE, and special ed are being brought into those similar conversations. So one of the strategies that I've been working on with administrators to implement here is to do end of the year goal setting rather than beginning of the year goal setting. Mm-hmm. So if in May your 3rd grade teachers sat down with your 4th grade teachers, you took a look at where 3rd grade kids were currently working and performing, and you set goals for the kids for the end of the following year, so that goal is formed by the teacher who has spent a year with them and with the teacher who's spending the next year with them, having a shared accountability and responsibility for building that goal. If I do that, the next year when I'm working with the student and they aren't meeting the goal that was set, I'm very quickly going to be turning to connect with the teacher who worked with the student the year before, because they were part of setting that goal with me. Another common one I've worked on with that is if you're looking at a middle school, at this time of the year, if you looked at 6th grade student writing samples and you set goals for the kids for the end of 8th grade. So if a current 6th grader, now you had goals set for those students for the end of 8th grade, you shared those goals across the content area. And from time to time as an administrator, you kept bringing teachers together, looking at the student work to see how close are we to achieving those goals that we've set. Those are the things that begin to bring a staff together. I'm wondering if this might be a good check-in spot before we go on to the last piece. Mm-hmm. Any questions or comments people want to make about this teacher relationship piece?
We have one question. Someone says, so many people view conflict as bad. What can you offer us to quickly set up productive conflict?
Yeah, so the quickest thing for productive conflict is common goal. So when a group of people are focused on achieving the common goal, then the conflict might be around the best way to reach that goal. And so now you might go into some experimentation, but I know that if your students aren't making the progress that my students are making, you would quickly be looking at what it is I'm doing, because we've got a common goal of our both students in both classrooms reaching and achieving that goal. I think it's also, if I give you an example that I'll just make it concrete with that school that I was working with today here looking at writing. The teachers are used to going to a PLC and getting work done instead of going to a PLC and learning. And so when the conflict comes up, people, it looks to them like they aren't reaching a quick agreement on getting a task done. But if you can get them focused that it's not the task, it's learning how to achieve something that we currently aren't achieving. So we can cooperate in doing the work that we know, where we know what to do, but it takes the collaboration when you want to achieve a goal that you currently aren't achieving, and you have to discover a way to get there. If you take a look at my website, which is barkleypd.com, and under blogs, if you just type into the search engine cooperate and collaborate, it'll take you to a podcast and some writing that I've done on that, and you'll find connections to other people's work there too. Within the blog, it'll give you the links to other people's work.
Great.
Thank you.
I guess I'll take to the last piece here then, and that is now identifying the leadership behaviors. So if you're working with the leadership team at a school or the leadership team at a district, now that you've worked this process backwards, as you go to move it ahead, what are the behaviors that need to change on the parts of the leaders to bring about those changes with the teachers that will bring about the changes with the student? I'm working with a couple of schools now where I'm coaching the administrators within the district on their own professional growth plans. And how does an administrator identify a change that you want to see happen in the school, which frequently means, as an administrator, I need to bring about a change in teacher behaviors. So I'm now stepping backwards to look at, okay, what behaviors do I need to take on as a principal that would lead to bringing on those changes on a teacher's part? And I'll just give a couple of quick examples here to that, off in different directions. So I do a lot of work with instructional coaches, and it's not uncommon for an instructional coach to share with me that there's some teachers in the building who are resistant to working with the coach or haven't reached out at all to work with the coach. And one of the quick things that I'll come back to check on is, what has the school administrator done to communicate a message of expectation about working with or using the instructional coach? So in other words, if I'm a principal and a teacher comes in concerned about a student's progress or a student's behavior, one of the first questions as a principal I would be posing back to the teacher is what did you find when you talked to the instructional coach? And if the person didn't talk to the instructional coach, I'd kind of get this somewhat look of surprise on my face. Now, equally, if a teacher came to me with concerns about a student behavior, one of the first questions I'd ask is, what did you find when you talked to last year's teacher? Or what did you find from the other teachers who have that student this semester? When principals ask those questions, they communicate the expectations. Another example, I was working with a high school in Texas. The principal came into the math department and put down on the table the names of a group of students who failed the end of year math test for Algebra 1, which is a state requirement. And his statement to the math department was that he wanted a plan from the math department. And boy, that really struck me. He didn't want a plan from the two teachers who were going to be teaching the class that those kids were in. He wanted the plan from the department. So his expectation was that the instructional strategies those two teachers would be using would be ones that the math department decided on. That the person who was teaching advanced math class would be doing some observations in the classrooms of those struggling students to help come back and piece together what those student production behaviors are. That's an administrator setting an expectation for the way that people are to work within a building. One of the big ones I'm putting out to principals right now is, are they building it into their interview and hiring practice? If you're working in a middle school and you're interviewing somebody who's applied for a 7th grade math teacher, I worked with the principal who said, this got to be real clear. I don't have a position here teaching 7th grade math. I have a position that puts you on a 7th grade team where you're going to be responsible for kids' math, English, science, social studies, performance, and life skills. And I have a position that's going to put you in a math department where you're going to be accountable for math achievement in grades 6, 7, and 8 across the school. So do you want to go further with the interview or not? Real simplistic, I have one. A lot of principals found this real powerful. One of the questions in the interview is, they ask the person they're interviewing, how open are you to having your people invited into your classroom to observe and give you peer coaching feedback, and you going into other classrooms to do the same? Well, if you ask that question in the interview, you're not going to find many teachers who say they aren't interested in it. Well, now that you've said it in the interview, you need to know, 3 months out here, I'm going to be holding you accountable. I'm going to be calling you and saying, remember in our interview, we talked about this. How many people have you invited into your classroom?
Yep.
So to me, it's critical that administrators keep thinking about this in the whole backwards process, so that they can then begin to collect evidence of change. And I just want to take a minute more of your time here, and then we'll take any questions you have to wrap this up. But if you think about the backwards process, the big mistake that's frequently made is that people will set a goal for student achievement, and then they wait to measure whether or not the achievement happened. If you do the whole backwards planning process, you begin to identify the series of behaviors that need to happen. So in order to get this change in math performance, we need this change in what kids are doing in classrooms. We need this change in what teachers are doing. We need this happening from the instructional coach and the administrators. So now it's September and we're implementing our plan. So let's say by October, how many of the administrative behaviors and instructional coaches' behaviors have been implemented? At what point are you looking for PLC behaviors to be different in order to get the individual teacher behaviors to be different? And at what point are you observing and collecting data that the teacher behaviors have changed? If we're into January and the teacher behaviors haven't changed, it's unlikely we're going to see this change in student outcome. So the evidence should be apparent to us along the way that we need to be backing up and changing and modifying in order to get to the outcome that we want. Rather than what happens too often is we set those outcome goals, they go up on a shelf, and then in May we pull them back out and kind of cross our fingers to see whether or not we got there. And reality is we had enough evidence back in December to know that that wasn't happening. So let me stop there and see if you got questions or comments you'd like to put out.
Okay.
If not, then I thank you for your stick-to-itiveness through technological problems. My website again is barkleypd.com. I've been blogging for 12 years now, so there's almost 600 blogs posted there. Just produced 120 podcasts, and there's also a whole set of video series. And it is all free, and it is all search engine accessible. So if you go to the search engine and type in a few of the words on one of the things we talked about today, it should take you to the writing and podcast that I've done on that. Plus, also you can find there how to get a hold of me. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions one-on-one, whether we did it on email or jumped on a phone or a Skype.
So Steve, I would just like to take a moment to thank you on behalf of NAMTC for graciously sharing your time and your expertise in the area of instructional coaching and leadership. You are a phenomenal resource for our area and across the world. And so thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
You're very welcome. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Steve. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.